Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, May 20th, 2019. Game of Thrones is over. Big Bang Theory is over, I think, as a matter of fact. Lots of television shows are over. Well, all television shows end. All good things and bad things, I guess, must come to an end. Did you watch the show? Did you ever watch the show? Yes, no, maybe. Lots of talk about it. I don't know. I guess there's still possibly people who are interested in watching the show and who have T-voted, although I would recommend against having done that. I did everything I could to clear the deck so that I could watch the thing, if not live, then not too far delayed, just so that no one would ruin the last one. There's no more chances to get it right. So I watched it. I'm up to date. I hope I don't inadvertently ruin it for anybody else, or Twitter doesn't inadvertently ruin it for anybody else, but you should catch up and watch it. Hurry up if you haven't yet, if you ever intended to. Lots of complaints, lots of rewrites being offered. I will only say this. I have lots of observations that I've made on Twitter, and I guess we won't spend any time on it on the air here. But I want to say, I don't know why, and nobody cares, but I'm not mad about the way it ended. I don't think that you should be allowed to do that. I guess you can go ahead and be mad, I suppose, but I don't know. It was a show and it entertained me, and that's great. And I guess my only observation on it is the only reason I have so many things to say or things that I've thought about the show is because they did such a good job developing the characters and the plot and the story. So don't take it, I don't know, like if George R.R. Martin is listening to the show or something. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. I don't hate you. I'm not going to ask you for a rewrite or petition you to do the season over again, unless that means we'll get more shows, in which case, yes, sure, great. Anyway, lots the rest of the world, not even talking about that at all. As a matter of fact, real developments in the real world over the weekend, and we'll catch up on some of those. Let's see. I don't know. Deutsche Bank apparently reporting that it saw suspicious activity that moved their staffers to raise red flags about money laundering, but the upper echelons of corporate there decided not to report that to the Treasury Department. A very interesting thing. Great headline. We'll dive into it, I am sure. Deutsche Bank saw suspicious activity in Trump and Kushner accounts, and the lead tells you what you need to know. Anti-money laundering specialists at Deutsche Bank recommended in 2016 and 17 that multiple transactions involving legal entities controlled by Donald J. Trump and his son-in-law Jared Kushner be reported to a federal financial crimes watchdog. That would be the Treasury Department. And apparently the alternative plan was, how about we don't report it and Mr. Trump and Mr. Kushner pool their resources and acquire the Treasury Department instead in a hostile takeover, and therefore there won't be any problem. We'll be off the hook for not reporting it, and they'll be off the hook for laundering all that money. The president is up and rage tweeting about it, insisting that there's nothing suspicious at all about a bankrupt guy who doesn't have any profitable businesses left, just sitting on a pile of cash for no apparent reason. And also, no, you can't see his tax returns. So, okay, there's a little bit of weirdness and suspicious activity going on there. Let's see. Also occupying a lot of time over the weekend, Trump's apparent scramble prior to Memorial Day, as if this was a good way of memorializing Memorial Day, getting set to pardon a strange combination of, military prisoners who are held currently or are awaiting trial under suspicion of having committed war crimes. Spree killers, essentially, who did it all in uniform. And the word is that Trump, A, plans to pardon them, and B, I guess this is the suspicion is that he thinks this will be widely supported in the military and among veterans and, among Trump fans. I'm sure somehow it will be. The wider community of veterans and active duty military are mostly apparently kind of insulted by all this, and with good reason. I only wonder, I wonder whether there's something else going on here or not. There's all sorts of speculation we could indulge in, and wouldn't it be irresponsible not to? To that end, Greg Dworkin joins us to do the irresponsible, because it would be irresponsible not to speculate, and he's here to speculate. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So maybe the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers will like it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they may join.
I mean, that's his base, right?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. I don't know whether, I guess the evangelicals like it because why not? They like Trump. But, they may, 3%ers might like it because they may join the 3%ers, once they're free. And, what could be better for the ranks of the 3%ers and the militias than to have somebody who's already pretty much pre-cleared for murder pardons by the president? That'd be great. Can really enforce the border laws as we see them, or no, maybe not laws so much as whatever we make up. And we got a guy with a get out of jail free card. Let's do it.
So it's hard to know exactly what he's thinking and why he does stuff because he doesn't really think.
Yeah, right. That's true.
So I'm not going to try to get into his head. The space is too small and I don't fit. But the idea that Deutsche Bank is kind of in trouble.
Yeah, that's nice.
For money laundering, and the money laundering that they're in trouble for happens to be Trump and Kushner accounts.
Yeah.
Is a story I think it's not going to go away, and I think it's only going to get deeper as some of those documents get subpoenaed by the Democratic committees, and we go from there. We're also waiting on Democratic committee subpoenas in terms of the courts and Trump's taxes. I think that one is still up for relatively soon resolution in terms of where that's going. So that's all important. Yeah. But there's politics too. And I was looking at this really interesting Trip Gabriel piece in the New York Times, coupled with a piece in Politico. The New York Times piece says, there's no boom in Youngstown, but blue-collar workers are sticking with Trump. This is the Lordsville plant.
Okay. I thought this was Mike
which
Casey
closed, and it's not going to hurt Trump politically. Kyle Condict, who's an Ohio expert, he wrote a book called The Bellwether, talking about how Ohio was often the swing state, but actually Ohio's kind of trending Republican these days.
Yeah.
And this is one of those situations where the Cleveland Democrats and the Appalachian Democrats used to have a coalition where they could win on occasion. And the Appalachian Democrats aren't Democrats anymore. They're Reagan Democrats.
Yeah, okay.
And the Cleveland Democrats aren't so organized as they could be. So Democrats have a hard time winning Ohio. Well, now, there may be that Toledo and blue Cincinnati in red Hamilton County and Cleveland can get together and put a coalition that might win. It's potentially possible, but just becomes more and more difficult.
Well, I hope they do it. I don't know about you.
At the same time,
yes, that
Democrats struggle in Ohio because Ohio's are struggling but still don't want to abandon the cultural. I said on Twitter, Ohio is really more Pennsylvania than it is Cleveland. And somebody pointed out here in Hamilton County, the surrounding red county around somewhat blue Cincinnati, we like to call it Hamiltucky. And actually, from Cincinnati, you could walk to Kentucky. You just go over the bridge, and there it is.
That's true. It can be done. There's an Ucky in there somewhere.
So, that's Ohio. But Politico has a contrasting article which reminds us that not everything is the same, even when it looks the same. Trump scrambles to reverse Rust Belt slide. His campaign is moving to shore up his standing in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, where its own polling shows him trailing Joe Biden.
Oh, yes. Good.
Trump's aides and allies are moving aggressively to shore up his support in those Rust Belt states. Trump's going to Pennsylvania Monday, and behind the scenes, they've rushed to the aid of languishing state Republican Party machines and have raised concerns that a potential GOP Senate candidate in Michigan actually could hurt the president's prospects there.
Oh. What?
They're also scrutinizing the map for opportunities to fire up his base for the trio of states. People close to the president insist they're not panicked. That's a bad thing to be reading about in the paper, I think.
I'm not panicked. Why would you think I'm panicked?
I'm not that. Who said it was panicked? Who?
Right.
Who said that?
Why would you? It's so funny. You think I? Okay.
They think Biden's numbers will drop once the honeymoon stage of his campaign wears off. Earlier this month, he's having a very long honeymoon.
It's all honeymoon for Joe, honestly. All right.
Earlier this month, Uncle Joe took the longest honeymoon I ever saw. Earlier this month, the president convened his top advisors, including campaign manager Brad Parscale, Republican National Committee Chairman Ronna McDaniel, and Jared Kushner for a dinner focused on 2020 that was described as an upbeat affair. I guess they were Skyping with Vladimir Putin at the time, so they were figuring out how to deal with 2020.
They're having nom-noms. That's upbeat for them.
But there's nagging concern after a midterm election in which Republican across the Midwest got clobbered. And as Trump's trade war is threatening farmers and factory workers who helped put him in office, the president won each state by less than 1 percentage point in 2016.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that President and Vice President are frequent travelers to Michigan, I think that shows everybody gets the math. Said former Michigan Attorney General Bill Schuett, who lost. A Trump supporter who recently joined the president for a rally in Grand Rapids. Do the math. You got to carry a state like a Michigan, a Wisconsin, a Pennsylvania. As a matter of fact,
one of those.
I sent you a graphic right under that, and the Skype thing looks kind of like one of those snake pictures.
Oh, yes.
And at the right side, the blue states in the snake, and on the left side, the red states are right in the middle. In this particular one, rather than purple, they tend to be gray. And it shows that basically if the Democrats win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, then they win the presidency. Florida is listed as a gray state. Maybe it is, particularly if you can prevent tampering.
Yeah, I thought you were just talking about the people.
But here's an interesting thing. Okay, next in the chain after Florida, the states start to turn a little pink.
Okay.
And then they get more red as you get down to Wyoming and West Virginia.
Right.
Okay.
Like going to a steakhouse.
But here are the pink ones right after the swing states in order. Arizona, North Carolina, okay, Georgia, Iowa, Texas, and then Ohio.
Yeah, okay. It's time to
All right, then you get into Arkansas,
Ohio.
South Carolina, definite red states. The point of that is that Democrats have a better chance of taking Arizona and North Carolina than they do Ohio. They have a better chance of taking Texas. They have a better chance of taking Georgia.
According to that map, yeah.
You know, Ohio is a really difficult state. So the fact that the Youngstown, Ohio article says that, we're still sticking with Trump is not surprising. For people who have been following this, Ohio is just drifting red.
Yeah, I see that. Okay.
All right, but, now if Trump winds up winning Ohio, this won't come as a shock, even if he loses all those other states.
Well, yeah, also we will. I mean, if he loses all those other states and then wins Ohio, I think we don't care.
That'll be shocking.
Yeah.
But we won't care. But it's it's interesting.
We'll be happy, and it won't matter what state
We'll be happy if he loses Arizona. Biden was winning by 5 in Arizona, don't forget. I told you that the other day.
Yes, that's right. So, Arizona much in the news for that. Okay.
Anyway, Ohio's culturally different than Michigan and Wisconsin. It's really not good to lump them all together. They're very different states.
Okay. Well, that's true. Oh, I was just thinking. I think that Attorney General in Michigan was, I think he says his name Shooty. Like, I'm a shooty guy.
Shatui.
That's what I think of you. Shatui to you.
I think that's right. Grand Rapids. Isn't Grand Rapids the home of Justin Amash?
Maybe.
You know what he did?
Yes.
Besides replacing Gerald Ford in Congress?
I hadn't
because I think that was Ford's seat too.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hadn't thought about that, but yes, he also made news over the weekend, giving us the official bipartisan cover we need to talk about impeachment, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Adam Schiff says it's not bipartisan enough.
Dang.
We need more Republicans,
but
it's interesting.
Well, that's funny.
That what he said was interesting.
Yes.
He's an interesting guy. Okay.
That's it.
He says,
that is the word for him.
I'm speaking out now. He says, and he did this in a Twitter storm, which was
avoid the rush.
I'm speaking out now,
yes,
because I took the time to actually read the Mueller report. I had questions about it. I had my staff come and work with me and get answers to this.
How do you say this word?
Yeah. What does this mean?
Right. Okay.
It's got 3 syllables. So I read all it, but I read the whole thing. And having read the Mueller report, which, by the way, my colleagues haven't.
That is largely true.
I have no choice but to come to the conclusion Trump needs to be impeached.
Oh, well, all right.
And the reason I'm saying it now and not before is that unlike my colleagues who digested the entire thing in 90 minutes and already had an opinion, I wanted to read the thing first. Now that I've read it, I can't help but come to this conclusion.
Excuses. Okay.
That was actually a pretty reasonable statement.
Yes, that was good.
Not just for a Republican.
What can I do?
For anybody.
Yeah, I'll take it. See what it means. I thought it was interesting in terms of, like what you were just saying, Adam Schiff saying, well, it's not enough. It's another one of those things like, well, we'll wait for the Mueller report. Here's the Mueller report. We'll wait for something else. It has to have bipartisan support. Here's some bipartisan support. It's got to be more.
In the 21st century, a single person from the other party is enough to call it bipartisan.
That's right.
This won't be the first time.
Believe me, it's
Republicans do it all the time.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Fox News does it every chance they get, and if they can't get one, they just put a D after a Republican's name, and
then they call it bipartisan.
or put an R after a D or whatever, and just say that's it. That's what happens. Just switch it. Now it's bipartisan.
Speaking of Fox News, interesting debate here, which I think is definitely our community is having and definitely worth having. This is a piece from the Washington Post by Amy Wang. In Fox News Town Hall, Buttigieg calls out Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, as not always there in good faith.
Yes. Okay. That is true.
Carlson for saying immigrants made the U.S. dirtier, as well as Laura Ingraham, who once compared detention centers for migrant children to summer camps. There's a reason why anybody has to swallow hard and think twice before participating in this media ecosystem.
Because that happens.
Right. Now, it's been said before, but there's a great deal of discussion about whether it's really worth going on Fox and whether people should participate. And the argument on the one hand is that, well, this is how you reach people. You have to go, as Amy Klobuchar says. She doesn't pronounce it Schuette, does it?
Yes,
it's Klobuchar. It says that you have to go to places where you're uncomfortable, not just places you're comfortable. But Parker Malloy had a very good Twitter analysis of this. She says, if you're a Dem running for the 2020 nomination and you go on Fox, they will spend the next 24 hours lying to their audience about you.
Yes, that's a great point.
Right? So right after Fox shows this town hall, which, by the way, Buttigieg gets a standing ovation, which surprises Chris Wallace, the moderator. Fox guest claims the way it was reported prior to Buttigieg's town hall was that Mayor Pete wanted to have Jefferson stricken from the history books. Of course, he didn't really say that, but they're just lying about it.
Who cares? Yeah.
Right? And then the other argument Malloy makes is, okay, she points out people will say this, oh, well, they'll do that anyway. At least it gives you a chance to talk to their audience for an hour.
Yes.
And Parker says, okay, but number one, they're using clips from that hour to misrepresent what was said. And number two, by the time they're done talking about it, the entire audience, including people who watch the event live, is going to be convinced, he pledged to be convinced that he proposed appointing an MS-13 member to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
There are pros and cons to it, she says, I'm sure, but a lot of the arguments people make in favor of doing the town halls is predicated on the idea that the audience actually hears what was said and not the Fox News version of what was said in coming days.
Yes.
So the manipulation, the propaganda way that they do things kind of negates the whole point of being on.
It does. I mean, I suppose that there's room for certain candidates to still think it's worth it, but in general, I would say not as much as you think, and that for most candidates, on balance, the answer will be no.
Yeah, and it's a pretty excellent example of why.
Yeah. It's a perfect example, and it shows. I mean, he went on there, he got a good reception, and although I will say that, I mean, I don't know that Fox goes so far as to, hand pick an audience or stock an audience. I wouldn't put it past them, but I don't know if they do that all the time. But the Fox audience has a vested interest in giving someone like Buttigieg a boost when they can, and then that'll only set them up to be knocked down later by Trump, and they'll applaud that, just as they applauded him when he was there. Well, God love them. I love what both of them had to say. One guy who argued for policy, and the other guy who said that the guy who had policies was a dirtbag and should be steamrollered. I love it. Okay.
So Elizabeth Warren stole a line from, at least in spirit, not words, from The Wizard of Oz. She said, "No way, no how." And then Kamala Harris also said the same thing. And Amy Klobuchar, here is a Michigan Advance interview with her. A three-term senator, Klobuchar, said on Saturday that one of the reasons why she's been the increasingly rare Democrat who wins over rural voters is because she goes not just where it's comfortable, but where it's uncomfortable. She noted that one reason why she appeared earlier this month at a Fox News town hall, and she's slated to appear this week on Fox News Sunday, which I guess she did, she said she wants to go everywhere. And we got to remind everybody that the Midwest is not going to just be flyover country in this election. And she's saying all this in Michigan, of course.
Okay. Well, I mean, sure, but and we said this much, though we were talking about in different contexts last week. Elizabeth Warren actually just went to where the people were, and they didn't even have to turn on their TVs. They could just come see her. So, I mean, you reach out to the Midwest. You could go there, or you could say, well, from this air-conditioned studio, I'm reaching out to the Midwest.
So I think this all ought to be in context with some observations by a political scientist who I think works at The Economist now, data journalist for The Economist, G. Elliott Morris. I've quoted him frequently. Elliott. And he has a newsletter, which I subscribe to.
Okay.
And he says, this week's big question, which voters should Democrats go after, Trump voters or non-voters?
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
And it gets to the heart of the Joe Biden candidacy, which is also somewhat controversial in regard to what's the strategy here. G. Elliott says, I've been thinking for a while that Democratic strategists are simply missing a few big points of political science in the 2016 election. Number one, efforts to increase turnout are vastly more effective and cost efficient than persuasion.
Okay.
Number two, in other words, he's making a case to go for the non-voters. Obama-Trump voters were largely motivated by factors other than policy, like racial resentment and status threat, making their votes even harder for Democrats to win back. See Ohio. And three, I threw in the see Ohio. He didn't say that. Okay. And three, non-voters were just as, if not more, decisive in Trump's 2016 victory than Obama voters who switched sides. Steve Bullock's newly announced 2020 campaign, hey, did you know he's running for president?
No.
Offers us a good jumping off point for this discussion. Steve Bullock, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is the current Democratic governor from Montana. In many respects, Joe Biden, whose white working class focused strategy we are familiar with, and Steve Bullock, also John Hickenlooper, are running on similar messages.
Okay.
Both have put a premium on mythical bipartisanship and cooperation in Washington. If only I, the ultimate negotiator, was elected president to bring both sides together, they might get something done.
No, they might.
If only Mitch McConnell agrees.
Yeah, right. Probably.
Right? So in some ways, this is a spin-off take on the persuasion versus turnout false choice that's been a staple of Trump-era political op-eds, meaning you go for both. But I instead ask the question of where Democrats can find better luck, among Obama-Trump voters or non-voters. Bullock told CNN's Jake Tapper he's Democrats' best hope in 2020 because he can win back some of the places they've lost. To his credit, Bullock is a Democratic governor of a state that Donald Trump won by 20 points. That's when he beat Greg Gianforte, the guy who body slammed a reporter.
Yeah.
And he's seen success pushing semi-progressive agenda, but even if he's a proven ability to win some Obama-Trump voters in Montana, the money he will have to allocate in more diverse states is spent elsewhere. So let's introduce a few numbers, and this is where it gets interesting. Numbers are always interesting. Among voters that cast ballots for Obama in 2012, 53.2 million voted for Clinton, 6 million voted for Trump, 2.3 million voted third party, and 4.4 million didn't vote at all. Okay. And the 4.4 million that didn't vote at all is an easier get, he says, than the 6 million who voted for Trump.
They voted once.
You already got the Hillary voters. You don't have to worry about them. Third parties are so unimportant. You don't. That's 2% of the vote. You don't even have to worry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 2 million rather voted third party. 4.4 didn't vote. 6 voted for Trump.
Right. Okay.
So some people look at the numbers and say, well, 6 is greater than 4 and certainly greater than 2. So let's go after the voters who voted for Trump. But again, it's harder to persuade than it is to recruit. And the 4.4 who didn't vote at all, who tend to be more anti-Trump than the Obama-Trump voters, kind of by definition, they, are going to be an interesting group to look at. And if you look at the racial composition of 2016 voters and non-voters, of those who didn't vote, 49% white, 36% black. Of those who voted for Obama and then Trump, 84% white, 8% black.
Okay. So that's
very, very different groups.
Yeah. And I can see what you mean. I can understand why it would be cheaper, for lack of a better term, to try and move people who said, well, I don't really like either of them, but,
Or I don't see a difference between them versus I was wrong.
Yeah.
I better vote for the other person next time.
Right. Exactly. And then
that's really hard.
Motivating factors of being white to do it. So, I guess that's probably true. So even though there's a larger pool of voters there, the number that you might be able to move with your efforts could end up being net lower than the number net movable.
That's the argument.
I gotcha. Okay. That makes some good sense. I think I can deal with that. And 4 million is nothing to sneeze at. We'll be back to sneeze after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. All right, let's see. I'm taking a look at the graphic from that newsletter that you mentioned. It makes a good deal. Since I don't think I can find a way to embed that graphic anywhere, not without stealing from the people who made it. But oh, you got your dragon with you this morning.
Yep,
that's good. All right, let's see what else is what else is on your list here.
Well, so in addition to that, just the basic background, I guess, that I'm setting up here is that Trump is not doing that well in the Midwestern states he needs to win the election. The reason he's not doing that well is because of the trade war. But those states, especially Pennsylvania and maybe Michigan, certainly had voters who didn't come out to vote. And if you spend your time working on getting those to the polls, given the fact that Trump is behind in the polls in those states, that's your best bet in terms of where to invest. Now, Joe Biden is running on a interesting sort of platform in regard to how you treat those voters. He's running on the maybe I'll go on Fox because what's the harm kind of approach, not a Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris definitely no platform.
Yeah, right.
What he's doing is giving lip service to the idea that bipartisanship is an ideal. It's a norm. We who look at this say, well, obviously not, because politics is broken. We have asymmetric parties, and you can't really cooperate with that. But I would argue that that's not so much the issue. I mean, if Biden wins and he tries this because he thinks it'll work, he's an idiot. But if he's running on this because it sounds good and voters like the concept of being willing to work with the other side, whether you're willing to play hardball or not,
I see.
That's a different issue altogether. And
yes.
Ezra Klein makes the argument that what Biden is actually doing is running on nostalgia, that you paint with somewhat simplistic terms the idea of the Obama administration as the Obama-Biden administration, and Biden was one of the people who brought you the Affordable Care Act and all the good things you remember from those days. And nostalgia is a very powerful force in American politics. Trump ran on Making America Great Again, which is really making America white again. Biden's running on, you like the Obama years, so let's just go with that, and I'll take credit for all the good stuff and kind of ignore all the bad stuff.
Yeah. I don't know what else he was going to run on. Obviously, he had
right,
to run on that, but sure.
Candidates do that. Candidates fudge and you know, and Photoshop the era, you know, and make it the way they want it to be. That's within their right. That's the whole idea of running a campaign. And Biden so far is doing it successfully enough that he's making the Trump campaign folks very nervous about what's going on in the Midwestern states, where Biden's approach actually plays pretty well, even if it doesn't necessarily play great with us.
Yeah. I can understand that. It always makes people uncomfortable to, you know, find out, well, the guy is not quite
why don't you just say
telling
what
the
you
truth,
think and
exactly.
think what you say? Because if you don't do that, you're not genuine. And I want somebody who's going to agree with me 100%, and I can just feel totally committed. Amy Walter made a really interesting comment on Twitter. She said, after watching the Biden campaign thus far, plus the Philly rally yesterday, it was over the weekend, my takeaway is that his candidacy is like one of those casual, nice restaurants you go to because they have a big menu and everybody in your group can find something to eat. And nobody's unhappy. Look, honey, they have grilled cheese for the kids and I can get a salad. But nobody walks away thinking it was an amazing meal or experience. It's not risky, but it's also not totally satisfying either. And plenty of people made the point, and I made the point as well on the pundit roundup when I included that, said, you know what, there's plenty of diners and chain restaurants that are still in business while the fancy artisanal places fail.
True. Yeah, I guess that's a way of looking at it. I don't know if that's ideal, but it's a way.
Well, and I also I had the opportunity on the pundit roundup to post a YouTube video of one of my all-time favorite Sid Caesar sketches from the 50s, where Imogen Coco takes him to a health food restaurant and all they can eat is plants.
Okay.
Flowers. You know, there's a bouquet on the table, and you're supposed to eat it.
Okay.
Sid wants a burger, you know, so he's like, why can't we go to Pepito's where I can have spiced snails and, you know, and spiced jalapenos? When am I eating this stuff? This is like an elm tree on rye. I mean, I don't want to be here. Very funny. Sid Caesar was a very funny guy. But, you know, the point is that you may think it's bland, but actually bland may sell.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bland people out there. I mean, what are you going to do? The polls say people are interested. So you might wish it wasn't the case, or maybe you could talk them into something else. It's still early, but they are saying, I'm listening to this, and I think that makes a good argument or good explanation of it. People just saying, I want to. How many people have said, I wish we could just go back? Can't we just make Obama president again? And more people have said that than I think really loved Obama's presidency at the time. Now they like it, and that's fine. Yeah. You know, it's understandable. You're right, but and what else would Biden be running on other than, hey, remember me? I was there too. I was number 2 on the ticket. So, you know. So, you know,
I was making fun of this New York Times article this morning by Peter Baker. Trump and the 4-letter presidency, and it talks about the fact that he swears a whole lot more than other presidents do. He
sure does, and isn't he genuine for it?
Yeah, and I was thinking, the New York Times, tut-tut, we're not inviting him to the dinner party, that cad, you know. But
not as bad as a tan suit, but...
Right, but the point is, it's a way for a con man to point out that he himself is genuine and just like you.
Yeah. That's what he's trying to do.
And in fact, they even printed the F word right in the middle of the article.
Oh, yeah? Oh, cool.
Yeah. In 2004, as vice president, Mr. Cheney told a senator on the Senate floor to go F yourself, except they used the word. They're in the New York Times with a link.
Right.
Well, they can say it and we can't say it. I don't know, but I'm just being nice to you.
We can, but, I just choose not to in case
your kids are listening. But that's the whole point. This is a whole nostalgia for an era where you didn't do stuff like that. Is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, see? I'm nostalgic for that.
Exactly. So I'm just giving you an example of how that works in a subtle way.
So effing nostalgic.
Except I'm not being subtle about it.
Yeah. Well, all right. Yeah, it's interesting that works for him. I just remember the whole things about disrespect for the office. Oh, my God, he wore jeans. He sat on the desk, tan suit.
Not just that. I'm one of you working people who I tend to stiff every chance I get, and here's 50 people to explain to you how I did that individually in different circumstances, so you can't say it was just a one-off.
Right.
Oh, well, I'm going to ignore all of that because, you're white.
Right. Yeah, all right. Well, New York Times, what can you do?
But, again, it's not a surprise. I grew up in an ethnic neighborhood, and, ethnic and racial issues in the 60s, where I grew up in Yonkers, were, big.
Yes.
And there was no way you were going to convince this group to get along with that group. Just not happening.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first heard of Reagan Democrats, I said, yeah, I get that. I grew up with these guys.
Yeah.
They're union members, but...
Right.
Right? And it's no different now.
Yeah.
And if you think we've made progress, okay, it used to be that the progress we made is that it was considered impolite to talk about that in public, hence the New York Times article. And now you could say whatever you want, except some of the things that you say tend to be incredibly racially divisive, hurtful, misogynist, whatever, and Trump normalizes it because you can say all this other stuff too.
Yes. Besides, aren't Democratic women the real racists here?
The real misogynists, I think you meant.
Yes, but also, I mean the minority women, the women of color, they're the real racists.
Yeah, they are, absolutely.
Yeah, the real misogynists are, of course, the white ones.
Right, exactly. So, it's just an interesting construct, and the only way it really works is if you don't think about it too hard. But most people don't think about politics that hard. They just, go with their gut.
Right. Well, there's plenty of gut to go around. We've got lots of it.
Right. So, now, the unknown.
Fewer brains.
That we just don't have a handle on yet is going to be the results of the Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia abortion laws that were passed.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And we don't really have a sense of what the impact is there. I'm thinking, the Women's March mattered a lot in 2018, and I'm thinking this is going to matter a lot in 2020. But the contours of that and where it's going to have the biggest impact still remains to be seen.
Political impact, the voting turnout, that sort of, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, even legal impact, it's going to have to make its way through the courts, and the lower courts are likely to strike it down. But that doesn't mean that's the end of it, because the whole goal was to do something so absurd, so ridiculous, that even Pat Robertson can't support it, in hopes of getting it to the Supreme Court so that Justice Kavanaugh will have a chance to rule on it, and Susan Collins will have a chance to regret or be troubled by Kavanaugh's vote.
I guess that's true. Yeah, I bring it up because there's there's lots of discussion about what's the impact, meaning they're debating over whether or not to be, aggressive, or are they being too overly aggressive in their assessment of how bad things will get, or does it not pay to hold back here? And this is what we've been telling you for a long time. I mean, there's lots of different levels.
There's a lot of sorting out to get done, and I suspect it's going to be a different message in different areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I would guess so.
Anyway, let me just throw in this from Dave Barnhart from Facebook. He's a Christian pastor. I can't see exactly his bio and such because I'm not on Facebook, but I can see this. And he says, the unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for.
Okay.
They never make demands on you. They're morally uncomplicated, unlike incarcerated, addicted, or chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating and maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about it because they cease to be unborn. It's almost like by being born, they've died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth, power, or privilege, without reimagining social strictures, apologizing, and making reparations. They're, in short, the perfect people to love if you want to claim you love Jesus but actually dislike people who breathe.
Yeah, I guess.
Prisoners, immigrants, the sick, the poor, widows, orphans, all the groups that are specifically mentioned in the Bible, they all get thrown under the bus for the unborn.
Right. There's no bus in the Bible, though.
So that's part of it. And again, I think this is just going to have reverberations well beyond what we can see right now, and we'll unfortunately just have to wait and see how that plays out to get a better handle on it.
Interesting.
So that's my segment for today.
Yes. Okay.
Little of this, little of that. Is there anything else that we wanted to talk about that I don't have here? Maybe impeachment.
Oh, that.
After the Justin Amish comments, however he pronounces his name. Does he pronounce it Chouette?
Yeah, Amashi.
Yeah. Here's why Democrats may rethink impeaching Trump. From Politico. Judges have repeatedly ruled that Congress has a greater claim to sensitive documents when it can point to an ongoing legal matter like impeachment.
Yes, yes.
Absent opening up impeachment proceedings, Syracuse University law professor David Dreesen, does he pronounce that Shooty? Says he thinks the Trump administration has the upper hand in its court fights over the ignored subpoenas and requests. The current argument that the information needed to help Congress craft legislation won't cut it. I think the courts, especially conservative judges, are more likely to give way to an impeachment inquiry than the claim that it's somehow relevant to legislation. So that's your argument for doing impeachment from a conservative point of view.
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, you do have to be conscious of the necessity of possibly convincing conservative judges and justices, I suppose, since you may end up there in court. Yeah, I mean, to me, of course, I think we were talking about it last week. Like, well, if the question is the impeachment inquiry relevant to legislation, I would just say, hey, an impeachment resolution is legislation. What's your problem? But yeah, there's this sort of weird idea that, no, legislation has to mean a particular sort of legislation. It has to be a bill, not a resolution or a concurrent resolution. That's not anybody's real definition, but I mean, what are you going to do? The robes sit there and say different. You got to play their game.
Right, exactly. So again, that's the real end to this segment.
Oh.
And I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll do it again. I'm sure stuff will happen, but that's kind of a smorgasbord summary of what happened over the weekend for those of you who were too busy watching Game of Thrones to watch The Game of Life.
Yeah, really. What's wrong with you people? You should stop. I don't ever want to catch you doing it again.
Well, any news shows anyway.
They listen to me now.
Don't you watch any more news shows about Game of Thrones from now on.
Yes.
You can watch the old ones, but don't watch the new ones.
Right, I guess so. Well, the new one is Chernobyl. Game of Chernobyl. We'll all watch that.
Right.
We know how that ends, though. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
the reactor melts down.
Okay. Take care, and I'll talk to you Wednesday.
Very good. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate your bringing us up to speed over on Monday after the weekend. It's tough to get back up to speed after a weekend. All right, let's see. Plenty going on here today. We'll make a brief tour of the Twitter feed and Pocket. And I can point you at probably my first non-radio diary, and certainly my first non-radio, non-gun fail diary. And I don't know, I'm going to say conservatively 150,000 years or so. Had to make note of it. I mean, actually had to. I was actually told by Joan and indirectly by Barb that I had to make mention of it. Something we discussed, let's see, probably like almost 2 weeks ago now, when Joan was on the Wednesday before last. And I think I pulled out the notes on my having visited the White House in May of 2009 and spoken to President Obama and an assembled group of White House luminaries, including Eric Holder and, every once in a while, there was all sorts of folks passing in and out of that room. We were in in the cabinet room, and it was very nice, and we all had a good time. And I think I may have worn a tan suit now that I think about it, but that was before I knew that was going to be controversial. But it was summertime. It was hot. Anyway, but I mentioned that we had as part of the conversation about detainee policy and indefinite detention, torture, etc., that I had raised some issues there that were relevant. Well, they were always relevant from the moment I raised them until now. And Joan had said, well, in addition to providing her with a link to things, she said, you ought to bring that up again. And Barb agrees. And I said, okay, I'll do that. Although she did offer, if you're not going to, they can get around to it, I'll steal it from you happily. That will be fine if you'd rather do that. I better get down and write it. And I took my time with it. And then at some point I realized, even though I was waiting a long time to publish the thing and actually get it ready, I realized that the 10-year anniversary of that meeting was coming up, and that's today. May 20th, 2009 was the day of the meeting in question. May 21st, 2009 was the first news report about that meeting that Michael Isikoff put together. And so I thought maybe now would be the time to bring that up. So I plopped it down there in the diaries section, and I see it's hanging on to the bottom of the recommended diary list. Don't worry about running over there and saving it or anything. I mean, you can if you like, but it doesn't change anything for me. I get the radio show to talk about it if I want to. But yeah, that was really something. And even I had mixed feelings about bringing it back up again, because even then, right at the time, the day or two after the meeting, I didn't want to talk about it. It wasn't a very pleasant thing for me. I came out of there with some very weird feelings about things, and I guess the president got what he wanted out of the meeting. We mostly kind of stayed quiet with mouths agape and watched things not get that much better, but I guess he wanted us to be quiet just for the time being so that it wouldn't get worse, but it wasn't going to get a whole lot better. I mean, I think he thought it was going to get a whole lot better. And, it got better in the sense that there was an 8-year respite from throwing more people into prison indefinitely, and no public outbreaks of information about us torturing people. So that's an improvement. It's not that they're the same. There's no difference between Bush and Obama on these questions. I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but I do question whether we learned any lesson in terms of the old don't look backwards thing. I thought that was interesting. It actually came up as a theme over the weekend, too, as I was watching Trump prepare to pardon these military war criminals and thinking about, boy, I remember when the presidential line on what to do with war criminals was you just didn't prosecute them because he didn't want to look backwards. Now, here was somebody, now we have the next president, the very next president, mind you, not only is looking backwards, but is looking backwards with an eye toward exonerating war criminals, not just letting them go, but saying those who were caught probably ought to be cleared and let go. So, gee whiz, what could go wrong with that? And of course, along the lines of irresponsible speculation, I offer you this thought. What could possibly go wrong with Donald Trump combing through the military prisons looking for thrill killers and war criminals whom he can release from prison if they're in there now, or spare prison if they're awaiting trial, who will then, of course, be personally loyal to him for having done so, and who will be released from prison or the threat of prison with the unspoken message that their murders will be forgiven. What could go wrong with something like that? What would you do if, what might these people do for gainful employment afterwards? Could, let's say, be hired as, personal security detail for the President of the United States, or as a retiree when he one day does leave office, or if he decides not to leave office, or if you've ever been pondering what would happen if we subpoenaed the president or various high-ranking officials and had to resort to inherent contempt because the Justice Department wouldn't prosecute them, and we sent the Capitol Police and Sergeant-at-Arms to make an arrest. Would the Secret Service protect them? Would they let them into the White House to make this arrest? Would there be guns drawn? Would there be a standoff between the Capitol Police and the Secret Service? Would anybody start shooting? Well, I don't know. That's awfully difficult to imagine. However, if you just had a detail of people who were, had already benefited from federal pardons from the president and who were pretty much war criminals and thrill killers to begin with and had a personal loyalty to the president, would those people shoot? Maybe. I mean, some of those guys, from the descriptions of their crimes anyway, or alleged crimes, at least in one case, might start shooting just for the hell of it. Nobody has to show up. The Capitol Police could be at home in bed, and they might start shooting cabinet members and other Secret Service agents just for the fun of it and think they're going to get away with it. I don't know what these guys are going to do. They're psychos. But hey, I'm sure nothing will go wrong with pardoning them, promising them pardons in the future, and saying, when you get out, you can be part of my presidential death squad. Because whatever. Might need one here in the United States. My friends in North Korea and Russia have got them, and they're doing great. So maybe I should have one too. Maybe that's not his plan. I don't know. He very rarely plans anything. So, anyway, let's see. I'll make a quick tour of what's over here in Pocket. We probably should comb through the Deutsche Bank story, actually the whole thing at this point. The break is coming up, so that'll break things up a little bit. I will note for the record that David Farenthold made some comment on this somewhere up near the top, I think, of the article. They mention that some of the accounts that got these red flags from the money laundering watchdog types in Deutsche Bank involved transactions with the Trump Foundation, which was interesting to note. And David Farenthold, who, of course, he hasn't yet written the book on the Trump Foundation, but he certainly could if he wanted to. He's got all the source material. You remember he was the guy that tracked down all the donations one by one, individually, who made them. Was it a donation? Right, he called all the people who had gotten donations from the Trump Foundation and wondered where the checks came from, and did Donald Trump give you money? Did the foundation give you money? Who gave money to the foundation? He did all the reporting on that, and he didn't know. He tweeted yesterday. Where's his tweet? This is so interesting. I didn't know any Deutsche Bank connections to the Trump Foundation even existed. They were never listed as a donor or vendor. So I guess he's referring to the tweet here of finance editor at the New York Times, David Enrich. Is he Enrich or Enric? And maybe he's, is it his name on the, yeah, he's got the byline on a New York Times piece about that. So he's tweeting about it and saying the activity in question involved Trump and Kushner overseas transactions, according to 5 current and former bank employees. Kushner Companies was moving money to Russian individuals. The Trump Foundation was also flagged for suspicious activity. And I guess that's if you catch David Farenthold by surprise on a question of the foundation, there's an interesting story to be found there. So anyway, let's take a look at the New York Times piece here. Deutsche Bank staff saw suspicious activity in Trump and Kushner accounts. David Enrich, or Enric, depending on the pronunciation, is our byline here. Byline Jacksonville, Florida, interestingly enough, too. Anti-money laundering specialists at Deutsche Bank recommended in 2016 and 2017. That's interesting because that's, of course, during the Trump presidency and when he was in charge, ostensibly, of the Treasury Department, that multiple transactions involving legal entities controlled by Donald Trump and Jared Kushner be reported to a federal financial crimes watchdog, because they're really good at what they do or whatever. Yeah, maybe not. The transactions, some of which involved Trump's now defunct foundation, set off alerts in a computer system. The algorithm got him. A computer system designed to detect illicit activity, according to 5 current and former bank employees. Compliance staff members who then reviewed the transactions prepared so-called suspicious activity reports that they believed should be sent to a unit of the Treasury Department that polices financial crimes. But executives at Deutsche Bank, which has lent billions of dollars to the Trump and Kushner companies, rejected their employees' advice. The reports were never filed with the government, and I guess that's actually something they can do. The nature of the transactions was not clear. At least some of them involved money flowing back and forth with overseas entities or individuals, which bank employees considered suspicious. Real estate developers like Trump and Kushner sometimes do large all-cash deals, including with people outside the United States, any of which can prompt anti-money laundering reviews. The red flags raised by employees did not necessarily mean the transactions were improper. Banks sometimes opt not to file suspicious activity reports if they conclude their employees' concerns are unwarranted. But the former Deutsche Bank employees said the decision not to report the Trump and Kushner transactions reflected the bank's generally lax approach to money laundering laws. The employees, most of whom spoke on condition of anonymity to preserve their ability to work in the industry, said it was part of a pattern of the bank's executives rejecting valid reports to protect relationships with lucrative clients. Not a huge surprise there, but disappointing nonetheless. You present them with everything, and you give them a recommendation, and nothing happens, said Tammy McFadden, a former Deutsche Bank anti-money laundering specialist who reviewed some of the transactions. It's the DB, Deutsche Bank, and the DB. There's another way, another abbreviation that goes DB. It's the DB way. They are prone to discounting everything. And again, like I said, not surprising, not conclusive either, but real estate is just one of those businesses that raises a lot of those red flags, precisely for the reasons that they stated. A lot of foreign money in lump sums and in cash. Dangerous. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. We continue with the Deutsche Bank story here in the New York Times. The terrible, terrible New York Times that everybody hates. Ready? Ms. McFadden, remember she's the former Deutsche Bank employee who worked in the anti-money laundering operation there. And it is interesting, as she was saying here, you present them with everything and you give them a recommendation and nothing happens. By the way, just to relate it to another earlier story, a lot of people making the very excellent point that there are people in the military, in SEALs and other special operators who have, pretty much given over their lives to the military and its mission, who risked an awful lot to put one of their own fellow soldiers away for violations of the laws of war, who now find that once again they have said everything, they've done what they were supposed to do, done as they were trained to do when they encounter problem people like this, and nothing happens. Either they don't go to trial at all because they've been pardoned, or they go to trial and they get convicted but then just get sprung by some idiot president who had heel spurs anyway, but who says, gosh, I love the military, and to prove it, I'm going to F the whole thing up. And I got to think that's awfully frustrating. And so I guess the question that floats out there now for, new war criminals, new up-and-coming war criminals, just trying to, try things out for themselves, need to be aware either. I mean, I guess the cup half full war criminals will say to themselves, well, nothing's going to happen, so I will just go ahead with my war crime. People will be discouraged from reporting me because, as you know, nothing happens. I'll just end up getting pardoned by the president anyway. Whereas the cup half empty war criminals, or vice versa if you're thinking of whistleblowers, cup half empty war criminals will say, well, and this is a very real possibility, the guys in my platoon will probably not bother reporting me because they know nothing will come of it from the military justice system. They'll probably just shoot me out in the field somewhere and say the enemy got him. Sorry. It's a possibility that's looming out there, but I guess, if you're a psycho killer, then I guess it doesn't bother you too much. All right. Also, probably, by the way, if you're like an actual SEAL, You'd rather stay alive, no doubt about it, but the idea of possibly being killed in action probably doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't bother you the same way it does a civilian, I guess, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyway, back to Deutsche Bank, which is somehow easier to discuss. Ms. McFadden, our whistleblower here, said she was terminated last year after she raised concerns about the bank's practices. As a disgruntled employee. Since then, she has filed complaints with the Securities and Exchange Commission and other regulators about the bank's anti-money laundering enforcement. Okay. Carrie McHugh, a Deutsche Bank spokeswoman, said the company had intensified its efforts to combat financial crime. An effective anti-money laundering program, she said, quote, requires sophisticated transaction screening technology as well as a trained group of individuals who can analyze the alerts generated by that technology both thoroughly and efficiently. At no time was an investigator prevented from escalating activity and identified as potentially suspicious. Furthermore, the suggestion that anyone was reassigned or fired in an effort to quash concerns relating to any client is categorically false. And because Deutsche Bank qualifies as Trump world, you know how to take that comment. It's probably not categorically false. Amanda Miller, a spokeswoman for the Trump Organization, who's also probably lying, the umbrella company for the Trump, you know what they are, said, we have no knowledge of any flagged transactions. It's scare quoted there. We have no knowledge of any flagged transactions with Deutsche Bank. She said the Trump Organization currently has no operating accounts with Deutsche Bank. She did not respond when asked if other Trump entities had accounts. And that's because the answer is probably yes, and they gave the most narrow possible legalistic answer, or maybe just lied outright. I don't know whether they even bother parsing things anymore. Karen Zabarski, a spokeswoman for the Kushner companies, said any allegations regarding Deutsche Bank's relationship with Kushner companies which involve money laundering is completely made up and totally false. The New York Times continues to create dots that just don't connect. Whatever. Deutsche Bank's decision not to report the transactions is the latest twist in Mr. Trump's long, complicated relationship with the German bank, the only mainstream financial institution consistently willing to do business with the real estate developer. Congressional and state authorities are investigating that relationship and have demanded the bank's records related to the president, his family, and their companies. Subpoenas from 2 House committees seek, among other things, documents related to any suspicious activities detected in Mr. Trump's personal and business bank accounts since 2010, according to a copy of a subpoena included in a federal court filing. Wording like that probably ought to net them these suspicious activity alerts, although I further suspect that there will be pushback. I don't know whether the bank will cooperate in giving those over. They've said they would cooperate, and that has caused a great deal of concern in the Trump camp, but I don't know whether they will follow through with that. And I don't know whether the Trump team will try to assert some sort of privilege, since the Treasury Department presumably was party to some of those reports. Or I don't know. I guess they weren't, actually, because they didn't get forwarded there. But they may try to claim that because they were prepared with the Treasury Department in mind, that's enough. I don't think that's really true. It shouldn't work, but you never know. That doesn't mean that they won't try to waste time demanding it. All right, let's see. Where were we with this story? Congressional and state authorities are looking into things, right? And subpoenas from 2 House committees seek, among other things, all of the documentation on this stuff. Mr. Trump and his family sued Deutsche Bank in April, because they have such a great relationship, right? Seeking to block it from complying with the congressional subpoenas. The president's lawyers described the subpoenas as politically motivated. Suspicious activity reports are at the heart of the federal government's efforts to identify criminal activity like money laundering and sanctions violations. But government regulations give banks leeway in selecting which transactions to report to the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. That would be, I guess, the FinCEN, right? Lenders typically use a layered approach to detect improper activity. The first step is filtering thousands of transactions using computer programs, which sends the ones considered potentially suspicious to mid-level employees for a detailed review. Those employees can decide whether to draft a suspicious activity report, but a final ruling on whether to submit it to the Treasury Department is often made by more senior managers. In the summer of 2016, Deutsche Bank's software flagged a series of transactions involving a real estate company of Mr. Kushner. You know who he is. They go on to describe him for some reason. Ms. McFadden, a longtime anti-money laundering specialist in Deutsche Bank's Jacksonville office, said she had reviewed the transactions and found that money had moved from Kushner companies to Russian individuals. She concluded that the transactions should be reported to the government, in part because federal regulators had ordered Deutsche Bank, which had been caught laundering billions of dollars for Russians, to toughen its scrutiny of potentially illegal transactions. So just to reiterate here, Deutsche Bank had already been busted for laundering billions of dollars for Russians. And so they said, when you see potential laundering of billions of dollars for Russians from now on, you should really speak up. And then they did. And then they said, screw those things, because it involves the president and his family. Ms. McFadden drafted a suspicious activity report and compiled a small bundle of documents to back up her decision. Typically, such a report would be reviewed by a team of anti-money laundering experts who are independent of the business line in which the transactions originated. In this case, the private banking division, according to Ms. McFadden and two former Deutsche Bank managers. That did not happen with this report. It went to managers in New York who were part of the private bank, which caters to the ultra-wealthy. They felt Ms. McFadden's concerns were unfounded and opted not to submit the report to the government, the employees said. Ms. McFadden and some of her colleagues said they believed the report had been killed to maintain the private banking division's strong relationship with Mr. Kushner. After Mr. Trump became president, transactions involving him and his companies were reviewed by an anti-financial crime team at the bank called the Special Investigations Unit. Very clever. That team, based in Jacksonville, and I wonder why they based their team in Jacksonville. Is there a reason? Is it that so much money laundering goes on in Florida, or is that not really the case? Or I just have this feeling that Trump and his Florida condos, that are almost entirely populated by Russians, would be a great. I mean, you'd want to be close to that action, but I don't know that Jacksonville affords. I don't know. Is it that did the deeds get recorded there? I mean, I don't know. Or maybe they were just like, well, we got to watch Florida, and there's a lot of jurisdictions we want to watch in Florida, mostly down, I guess, that East Coast, further down. But I guess well, where should we put them? I don't know. Either right in the middle of the action, or I guess in the state capitol. Maybe that's why I don't know. I'd be curious to find out. Not who you should ask, sure who you would ask about that. But anyway, the team based in Jacksonville produced multiple suspicious activity reports involving different entities that Trump owned or controlled, according to three former bank employees who saw the reports in an internal computer system. Some of those reports involved Trump's limited liability companies, the LLCs that he has hundreds of, right? At least one was related to transactions involving the Trump Foundation, two employees said. Deutsche Bank ultimately chose not to file those suspicious activity reports with the Treasury Department, according to the three former employees. They said it was unusual for the bank to reject a series of reports involving the same high-profile client. Mr. Trump's relationship with Deutsche Bank spans 2 decades, during a period when most Wall Street banks had stopped doing business with him after his repeated defaults. Deutsche Bank lent Mr. Trump and his companies a total of more than $2.5 billion. Projects financed through the private banking division made Trump's Doral Golf Resort near Miami and his transformation of Washington's old post office building into a luxury hotel, I guess, made them possible. And we just saw at the end of last week that Doral is like losing money hand over fist and is a total disaster, but the hotel seems to be doing okay because of emoluments. When he became president, he owed Deutsche Bank well over $300 million. That made the German institution Trump's biggest creditor and put the bank in a bind. Senior executives worried that if they took a tough stance with Trump's accounts, for example, by demanding payment of a delinquent loan, they could provoke the president's wrath. I'm sure they would. On the other hand, if they didn't do anything, the bank could be perceived as cutting a lucrative break for Mr. Trump, whose administration wields regulatory and law enforcement power over the bank. That's true, too. In the past few years, United States and European authorities have punished Deutsche Bank for helping clients, including wealthy Russians, launder funds, and for moving money into countries like Iran in violation of American sanctions. The bank has paid hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties and is operating under a Federal Reserve order that requires it to do more to stop illicit activities. But I guess they have instead opted to do less. That is curious. On 2 palm tree-lined campuses in Jacksonville, Deutsche Bank has thousands of employees who vet customers and transactions. 6 current and former bank employees said the operations were deeply troubled, just like Susan Collins. Anti-money laundering workers were pressured to quickly sift through transactions to assess whether they were suspicious, the employees said. As a result, they often erred on the side of not flagging transactions. I could see that. 2 former employees said that they had raised concerns about transactions involving companies linked to prominent Russians, but that managers had told them not to file suspicious activity reports. The employees were under the impression that the bank did not want to upset important clients. Several employees said they had complained about the bank's anti-money laundering processes to Joshua Blazer, the head of Deutsche Bank's Financial Crimes Investigations Division in Jacksonville, and had been criticized then for having a negative attitude. One employee said she resigned last summer over concerns about the bank's ethics. Mr. Blazer, hired by Deutsche Bank in 2017 to strengthen the bank's financial crime fighting apparatus, declined to comment. Ms. McFadden's job at Deutsche Bank was to inspect clients and transactions in the company's private banking division, the unit that lent money to Mr. Trump. She joined the bank in 2008 after working for Bank of America, also in Jacksonville. McFadden had left Bank of America in 2005 and later sued for racial discrimination and wrongful termination. Oh, that's going to just look great. According to court records, her lawsuit was settled on confidential terms the same year she joined Deutsche Bank, where she went on to win multiple performance awards. Well, that's going to look good too, I guess, except that'll really look good. But, of course, they'll portray her as a serial disgruntled employee. Anyway, around the time she flagged the Kushner Company's transactions, Ms. McFadden said she also complained about how the bank was scrutinizing the accounts of high-profile customers, such as those in public office. Those customers, known as politically exposed persons, that's an interesting term for it, are regarded as at heightened risk of being involved in corruption. As a result, their accounts are subject to extra vetting. Ms. McFadden said she had told her superiors that dozens of politically exposed clients of the private banking division, including Trump and members of his family, were not receiving that added attention. Her superiors told her to stop raising questions, according to Ms. McFadden and the 2 former managers. After taking her complaint to the Human Resources Department, the graveyard of such things, Ms. McFadden was transferred to another division. She was terminated in April of 2018. The bank told her that she was not processing enough transactions. Ms. McFadden disputed that. She said her superiors had reduced the number of transactions she was assigned to review after she voiced her concerns. She and the 2 former managers said they perceived her termination as an act of retaliation. They attempted to silence me, she said. I'm at peace because I know I did the right thing. That may uncover one of their fun techniques there. I bet, I think sort of being quietly alleged that the people they want to get rid of, they assign fewer and fewer cases to until they finally say, all right, now we're going to fire you for not handling enough cases. I handled everything you gave me. Yes, but you didn't handle enough. Our threshold is 100 a month. Well, you only gave me 50. Yeah, well, why do you think that is? Oh, now that you mention it, I get it. All right, very interesting story. I'm sure we'll hear more about it. Did David Fahrenthold have more to say on the subject at any point? I should check in on his timeline and see whether he has updated that recently. Maybe we'll check during the break on what he's been doing in the last few hours or days since that story actually broke. Okay, let's see. Oh, this was an interesting story, I thought. I would say ordinarily I'd wait for a Friday on this one. It's a little bit one-off from American politics, but not that far off, and it's Monday, and it's a long way to Friday. Did you catch this CNN report over the weekend? A special report at that, by Eliza McIntosh. There's a video component here because CNN is a television station. But I'll give you the written side of this. Finland, the people who rake their forests. Finland is also taking other precautions against dangers outside of natural disaster. Finland is winning the war on fake news. How do you like that? Here's what it's learned and what about it may be crucial to Western democracy. That's a mangling of what the headline says. But really, I just paused to make sure we got the raking the forest part in there. Dateline is Helsinki, Finland. On a recent afternoon in Helsinki, a group of students gathered to hear a lecture on a subject that is far from a staple in most community college curriculums. Now realize I'm going to be called upon to read Finnish names, and that's a mistake for me, but here we go. Standing in front of the classroom at Espoo Adult Education Center, Jussi Tovanen. I'm going to guess Toivanen. Do I bother? Is it even helpful if I spell Finnish names for you? I'll just refer you to the article. You can go look it up there. Jussi Tovanen worked his way through his PowerPoint presentation. A slide titled, "Have You Been Hit by the Russian Troll Army?" included a checklist of methods used to deceive readers on social media. Image and video manipulations, half-truths, intimidation, and false profiles. Another slide, featuring a diagram of a Twitter profile page, explained how to identify bots. Look for stock photos, that is, I guess, used as avatars, right? Assess the volume of posts per day. Check for inconsistent translations and a lack of personal information. The lesson wrapped with a popular deep fake, as they call them. That is, highly realistic manipulated video or audio of Barack Obama to highlight the challenges of the information war ahead. In other words, something that was faked up to look like video or sound like audio of Barack Obama saying something that he didn't, but to be offered up as proof that, among conspiracy theorists and weirdos, and I guess potentially everybody else in the world, that he did. Now, what made the article interesting, I think, comes up in this next paragraph. Just this one fact made it particularly interesting. It was interesting all by itself anyway, but why spend time sharing it on the air? Listen to this paragraph. The course is part of an anti-fake news initiative launched by Finland's government, and that would be great if we could do that here, but we don't have Finland's government. But this is the interesting part. Launched by Finland's government in 2014, 2 years before Russia meddled in the U.S. elections. And the initiative is aimed at teaching residents, students, journalists, and politicians how to counter false information designed to sow division. 2014, boing, sound effect. Boy, they seem to be on to this very early. I wonder why. And it may be the fact contained in this next paragraph that helps with this. The initiative is just one layer of a multi-pronged, like rakes, a multi-pronged cross-sector approach to the country that the country is taking to prepare citizens of all ages for the complex digital landscape of today and tomorrow. The Nordic country, Finland, remember, which shares an 832-mile border with Russia, is acutely aware of what's at stake if it doesn't. No wonder. They're neighbors. That's why they're on to them so early. Finland has faced down Kremlin-backed propaganda campaigns ever since it declared independence from Russia 101 years ago. But in 2014, after Moscow annexed Crimea and backed rebels in eastern Ukraine, It became obvious that the battlefield had shifted. Information warfare was moving online. And why not? After all, what's the coin of the realm online? It's information, whether it's real or not. Toivonen, the chief communications specialist for the Prime Minister's office, said it is difficult to pinpoint the exact number of misinformation operations to have targeted the country in recent years, but most play on issues like immigration, the European Union, or whether Finland should become a full member of NATO. Russia, of course, is not a fan of NATO. As the trolling ramped up in 2015, the president of Finland. All right, we're ready for this one. Sauli Niinisto. I can't even begin with Finnish. I don't know anything about the Finnish language, and I think I can mostly stumble through other Scandinavian languages that are more similar to one another, but Finnish is a different story. Niinisto, N-I-I, two I's, Niinisto. The president of Finland, in 2015, called on every Finn to take responsibility for the fight against false information. A year later, Finland brought in American experts. All right, I just fainted. Sorry about that. They brought in American experts to advise officials on how to recognize fake news, understand why it goes viral, and develop strategies to fight it. The education system was also reformed to emphasize critical thinking. That's always a good idea. So congratulations to you for doing that. But honestly, can you imagine? So in 2014, they start this. In 2015, trolling is ramping up, and the Finns say, what are we going to do? It's getting worse. I know. We'll bring in American experts on how to recognize fake news and keep it out of your election system. The following year, the Finns watched in horror as the Americans elected a fake news president, the very same people we had just hired to teach our country about how to avoid fake news, fell for fake news, and then the idiot they elected said we rake our forests on top of it all. All right. Whatever. And if we had these experts, where were they? Why weren't we using them? Why did we fall prey to this? Regardless. Okay. There's an interesting graphic in here about media literacy across Europe. Finland ranked first out of 35 countries in a study measuring resilience to the post-truth phenomenon. I don't know how you measure that, but I'd like to find out and put it to work here in the United States and what the hell, all around the world. Although it's difficult to measure the results in real time, the approach appears to be working, and now other countries are looking to Finland as an example of how to win the war on misinformation. Do they rake their damn forests or not? It's not just a government problem. The whole society has been targeted. We're doing our part, but it's everyone's task to protect the Finnish democracy, Toivonen said, before adding, the first line of defense is the kindergarten teacher. Wow, that's like really super dramatic. Kindergarten teacher. All right. Well, we can get into a little bit here before we hop out for our break. Sorting fact from fiction is up next. At the French-Finnish School of Helsinki, and it's not finishing school, it's a Finnish school, a bilingual state-run K-12 institution, that ethos is taken seriously. In Valentina Uito's social studies class, I promise you I can never get it right, a group of 10th graders were locked in debate over what the key issues will be in next week's EU elections. Brexit, immigration, security, and the economy were mentioned with a flurry of raised hands before students were asked to choose a theme to analyze. They've gathered what they think they know about the EU election. Now let's see if they can sort fact from fiction, Uito said with a smirk. The students broke off into groups, grabbing laptops and cell phones to investigate their chosen topics. The idea is to inspire them to become digital detectives, not like Pikachu detectives, but digital detectives, like a rebooted version of Sherlock Holmes for the post-millennial generation. I'm not thinking of the graduation for any particular reason. It's just, almost June and whatnot. All right. We'll take our break coming up, regroup and check through the rest of this thing and see how long this article runs and whether we can make it all the way through or whether we have given you what you need to know for the day. I'll just finish up with one more paragraph here. Her class is the embodiment of Finland's critical thinking curriculum, which was revised in 2016 to prioritize the skills students need to spot the sort of disinformation that has clouded recent election campaigns in the U.S. and across Europe. Gee whiz, why do they have to revise that in 2016, I wonder? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I am tempted to continue with the Finland story, if only because it's kind of fascinating every once in a while to find out, first that in 2014 they first started this program. Then in 2015, the next year, they said, trolling is getting worse, we need to bring in American experts. And then in 2016, they revamped the program, which I suspect means they said, we got to get rid of these American experts because what a bunch of idiots. They didn't see it coming in their own country. I have to, by the way, hearken back to a story from here in the United States about, I bring this up all the time, the recording made of Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise, who else was there? Paul Ryan, Kathy McMorris Rogers, etc., talking about their knowledge of the Russian propaganda, fake news, interference program, and how they had learned from the Ukrainians that this was happening everywhere and was designed to be used all across the Western world. So, I mean, there was some international recognition of this problem during the election, before the election, and now finally after the election. I just find it pretty amazing that there's still a significant portion of our own population that has doubts about whether or not this actually happened. I think it's becoming pretty clear. I mean, was all of Finland crazy? If they rake their forests, they may be, but they don't. So I don't know what to tell you. All right. So I thought that was interesting. We had to revamp the program after 2016 because we were relying on the wrong advisors. We were talking to Americans thinking, of course, the Americans know what they're doing when it comes to responding to Russian propaganda. That's all they ever worry about over there. And as it turns out, we didn't do such a good job with that. Anyway, back to the particular school that we were talking about. What was the name of the school again? Oh, yes, it was the French-Finnish School of Helsinki, and this particular class being taught on the subject. The school recently partnered with Finnish fact-checking agency Faktabari. Like, that's fact bar. Faktabari. And it's not like what you want to do to Bari, but I'm just saying that's Finnish for you. Fact bar, not Pinocchio bar, to develop a digital literacy toolkit for elementary to high school students learning about the EU elections. And interesting, too, that they're targeting that. Because the very next election's going on, they want to watch through this lens. Very smart of them. Current events and all. It was presented to the bloc's expert group on media literacy and has been shared among member states. The exercises include examining claims found in YouTube videos and social media posts, comparing media bias in an array of different clickbait articles, probing how misinformation preys on readers' emotions, and even getting students to try their hand at writing fake news stories themselves. If you can't stop the fake news, you might as well prepare them for the job market, I guess. But I guess that's reverse engineering of fake news. What we want our students to do is, before they like or share in the social media, they think twice. Who has written this? Where has it been published? Can I find the same information from another source? All good questions. We all should be asking that. Carl Kivinen, director of Helsinki French-Finnish School and former Secretary General of the European Schools, told CNN. He cautioned that it is a balancing act to try to make sure skepticism doesn't give way to cynicism in students. It was very annoying, or it is very annoying, to having to fact-check everything you read and not being able to trust anything or anyone on the internet, said 15-year-old Tatu Tukyanen. Oh my gosh, I'm ruining that. One of the students in Uito's class. I think we should try to put a stop to that. Sounds like a good idea. In the school library, Alexander Shemeka, 17, and Gabrielle Bagula, 18, are watching YouTube videos together on an iPhone and chatting about other social platforms where they get their news. Instagram, Snapchat, Reddit, and Twitter, but notably not Facebook. That's for old people, they say. That's funny. The word fake news, it's 2 words, is thrown around very often, but they're Finnish, so it's okay. Shemeka said, explaining that when their friends share dubious memes or far-fetched articles online, he always asks for the source. You can never be too sure, Bagula agreed. I hope he's not one of those guys that just tweets, source, ? But anyway, I let them off the hook for saying fake news is a word, or the word, fake news being thrown around, because I don't know any of their words and I can't even pronounce their names. So I think they get a lot of leeway in this. They can speak English. I can't speak Finnish. That's exactly the type of conversation that Kivinen hopes to cultivate outside the classroom. What we have been developing here, combining fact-checking with the critical thinking and voter literacy, is something we have seen that there is an interest in outside Finland, Kivinen said. But Kivinen isn't sure that this approach could serve as a template for schools elsewhere. In the end, it's difficult to export democracy, he added. Wow, that is a much bigger nut to crack. Okay, yes, we can address that some other day. So save for another day the discussion of whether or not you can export democracy. Oh, does that have some implications? The superpower of being Finnish is next. Of course, you can fly from forest to forest on your rake. But there's this. It may be difficult to export democracy, but it is easy to import experts. I made a mistake about importing ours, I guess, which is precisely what Finland did in 2016 after kicking the idiots they had imported out in 2015. All right. That's what they did in 2016 to combat what it saw as a rise in disinformation emanating from accounts linked to its neighbor to the east. They knew that the Kremlin was messing with Finnish politics, but they didn't have a context with which to interpret that. They were wondering if this meant that they, Russia, would invade. Was this war? Jed Willard, director of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Center for Global Engagement at Harvard University, who was hired by Finland to train state officials to spot and then hit back at fake news, told CNN. Was he hired in 2015 as part of the first wave of idiots, or in 2016? I have concerns if they hired Americans in 2015 and then said, what we need is different Americans in 2016. Okay. Russia maintains that it has not and does not interfere in the domestic politics of other countries. That's obviously not true. Behind closed doors, Willard's workshops largely focus on one thing, developing a strong national narrative rather than trying to debunk false claims. What? Why? The Finns have a very unique and special strength in that they know who they are, and who they are is directly rooted in human rights and the rule of law, in a lot of things that Russia right now is not, Willard said. There's a strong sense of what it means to be Finnish. That is a superpower. Not all nations have the type of narrative to fall back on that Finland does. And by the way, I would caution here only that it is sometimes that very feeling that ends up motivating the white nationalists. Well, we have a very strong feeling of what it means to be Finnish and what that is about. And that's why we don't want immigrants in this country diluting that. I mean, that does happen. So beware of that. I'm sure they are. And I hope they're on guard against it. The small and largely homogeneous, or homogeneous as some people like to say, country consistently ranks at or near the top of almost every index. Happiness, press freedom, gender equality, social justice, transparency, and education, not to mention neatness of their forests, making it difficult for external actors to find fissures within society to crowbar open and exploit. Ah, there you go. Finland has had a long tradition of reading. Its 5.5 million people borrow close to 68 million books a year, and it spent just $110 million, or rather just spent $110 million on a state-of-the-art library referred to lovingly as Helsinki's living room. Finland has the highest Pisa score for reading performance in the EU. I don't know what that means, but I get the gist. And as trust in the media has flagged in other parts of the globe, Finland has maintained a strong regional press and public broadcaster. According to the Reuters Institute Digital News Report 2018, Finland tops the charts for media trust, which means that citizens are less likely to turn to alternative sources for news. But some argue that simply teaching media literacy and critical thinking isn't enough. More must be done on the part of social media companies to stop the spread of disinformation. We do think that here, yeah? Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, who are enablers of Russian trolls. They really should be regulated, said Jessica Aro, a journalist with Finland's public broadcaster YLE, who has faced a barrage of abuse for her work investigating Russian interference long before it was linked to the 2016 U.S. elections. Just like any polluting companies or factories should be and are already regulated for polluting the air in their forests, they love the forests, the waters, these companies are polluting the minds of people, so they also have to pay for it and take responsibility for it. Facebook, Twitter, and Google, which are all signatories to the European Commission's Code of Practice Against Disinformation, told CNN that they have taken steps ahead of the EU elections to increase transparency on their platforms, including making EU-specific political advertisement libraries publicly available, working with third-party fact-checkers to identify misleading election-related content. They're not very good at that, actually. And cracking down on fake accounts. Aro's first open-source investigation back in 2014 looked at how Russia-linked disinformation campaigns impacted Finns. Many Finns told me that they had witnessed these activities, but that it was only merely new digital technology for the old-fashioned, old-school Soviet Union propaganda, which had always existed and that Finns have always been aware of, Aro said, so they could avoid the trolls. The probe also made her the target of a relentless smear campaign, accused of being a CIA operative, a secret assistant to NATO, a drug dealer, and deranged Russophobe. Aro received some respite when last year the Helsinki District Court handed harsh sentences to two pro-Putin activists on charges of defamation. Ilya Janitskin, a Finn of Russian descent, who ran the anti-immigrant pro-Russia website MV Lety, and Johan Bachmann, a self-declared human rights activist and frequent guest on the Russian state news outlet RT. It was the first time that an EU country had convicted those responsible for disinformation campaigns, drawing a line in the sand between extreme hate speech and the pretense of free speech. Notice, by the way, that Johan Bachmann disguises himself as a human rights activist. What could be wrong with a human rights activist? You've got to back those human rights activists coming out of Russia. They're brave people. And then he just uses that assumption to abuse. Perhaps the biggest sign that Finland is winning the war on fake news is the fact that other countries are seeking to copy its blueprint. Okay. Representatives from a slew of EU states, along with Singapore, have come to learn from Finland's approach to the problem. The race is on to figure out a fix after authorities linked Russian groups to misinformation campaigns targeting Catalonia's independence referendum and Brexit, as well as recent votes in France and Germany. Germany has already put a law in place to fine tech platforms that fail to remove obviously illegal hate speech, while France passed a law late last year that bans fake news on the internet during election campaigns. We'll see how well that works. Some critics have argued that both pieces of legislation jeopardize free speech. Russia denied interference in all of those instances. Finland's strategy was on public display ahead of last month's national elections in an advertising campaign that ran under the slogan, "Finland has the world's best elections. Think about why," and encouraged citizens to think about fake news. Officials didn't see any evidence of Russian interference in the vote, which Toivonen says may be a sign that the trolls have stopped thinking of the Finnish electorate as a soft target. A couple of years ago, one of my colleagues said that he thought Finland has won the first round countering foreign-led hostile information activities, but even though Finland has been quite successful, I don't think there are any first, second, or third rounds. Instead, this is an ongoing game, Toivonen said. It's going to be much more challenging for us to counter these kinds of activities in the future, and we need to be ready for that. Wow. We've made it all the way down to the bottom. It was a long article, but I think well worth it just in terms of thinking about where we are in our fight against Russian fake news and how well grounded, it seems, accusations of such a program actually are. It's not something, in other words, that sprung out of the surprise result, however you might describe it, of the 2016 U.S. elections. And you should keep that in mind. I mean, I think that's actually probably a pretty good point to make in case you're actually involved with, in a discussion or debate about it with someone who would listen to reason. It's very frequently said by Trump supporters, and I don't think that there are very many of them that you can actually argue factually with, but it is very often said, or it's actually very often said by Russia skeptics, even among the American left, that the whole Russia story is really just an excuse for losing the election that everybody thought was a lock for Hillary Clinton, supposedly. And that bitterness over having lost the election has led people to conclude that it must be the Russians behind it. I don't know what explains Russia's immediate neighbors thinking as early as 2 years before that election and prior to the declaration of Donald Trump for the office of president that there was such a widespread and active program of Russian political disinformation that the national education apparatus had to develop a countervailing curriculum to deal with nationwide. I mean, how do you explain that? I mean, I don't know if you necessarily believe everything the Finns do, and believe everything the Finns do is a great thing, but an otherwise fairly sober country, despite the fact that they rake their forests, which they don't do, that they would set this time aside and make this effort in 2014, I think says an awful lot. You know, I don't know if you're talking to the kind of person who would accept evidence from Finland in all of this. Okay, moving on. There are a couple other things that we ought to touch on here. Let's see. For one thing, one answer that was thrown out there at the end of last week to the speculation, shall we say, that or the information that we got from the recycling, I suppose, of the Flynn story, the Mike Flynn story. Hanging out there was the idea that Flynn had messaged with a member of Congress about I don't know how to put it, about obstructing justice in the Trump-Russia investigation. And while we found out that that was the case, he had some messaging with a Trump attorney, it didn't take much to find out that it was John Dowd in question here. But then we weren't sure which member of Congress he had been texting with. And people threw out suggestions like Devin Nunes, which would make a certain amount of sense. But here, TPM has this story. Flynn messaged Matt Gaetz, of all people, on Twitter just months into the Mueller probe cooperation. This by Summer Concepcion here from last Friday, was it? Or maybe Saturday, the 18th. Yeah. CNN and Politico reported Friday night, here we go, that former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn contacted at least one member of Congress just months into his cooperation agreement with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Flynn sent Twitter direct messages to Representative Matt Gaetz, the nutcase of Florida, in April of 2018 to keep the pressure on. You stay on top of what you're doing. Your leadership is so vital for our country now. Keep the pressure on, Flynn also wrote. CNN notes that Flynn messaged Gaetz within an hour of the Florida lawmaker's appearance on Fox Business's Lou Dobbs Tonight, where he criticized the Mueller probe. Additionally, CNN and Politico reported that Flynn messaged Gaetz the day of Attorney General Bill Barr's confirmation in February. Really? Flynn sent Gaetz gifts of a bald eagle and an American flag without any accompanying text. So I don't know how cooperative he really is. Anyway, although Gaetz confirmed that he received Flynn's messages, he denied responding to them and said he didn't have a prior relationship with Flynn, which is obviously probably, according to these words anyway, according to this description, wrong. It's unclear if Flynn messaged other lawmakers or whether Mueller knew of Flynn's outreach to them. There is no indication that Flynn's messages to Gaetz is related to a court filing unsealed Thursday that Flynn had relayed to prosecutors statements made in 2016 by senior campaign officials to which only a few select people were privy. Not sure what exactly that last bit means. Is that supposed to mean that maybe Gaetz isn't the congressperson referred to in the re-examined Mueller reports, but that this coincidence exists? It might be them, but it might not be. I don't know. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy if it turns out to be him and leads to trouble. All right. What else have we got? Here's a small tidbit that I would share with you, also from out of Talking Points memo, because, they do some interesting stuff. Remember Ben Carson's $30,000 dining room set? Well, it looks like it was an illegal purchase. Oh, man, I can't believe it. Yeah. Sad news, but we knew it was a stupid purchase, and they tried to get out of it, but did we know it was illegal? Kate Riga, reporting here for TPM, the Government Accountability Office found Thursday that Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson broke the law when he bought a $31,561 dining set to furnish his office. The dining set, plus an $8,000 dishwasher, my goodness, violated the requirement that agencies must notify Congress when spending over $5,000 on office furnishings, the GAO found. How do you like that? I guess spending controls built into the law there, designed to entrap or to ensnare exactly these sorts of purchases. At the time, Carson, you may recall, bravely shifted the blame for the dining room set onto his wife, saying that he wasn't aware of the purchase beforehand and that he canceled the transaction when he learned of it. I don't know. So here's a GAO letter about the subject, but it looks to be 8 pages long, and I can't really imagine that's really worth reading on the air, though it might be worth parsing later on just to have some fun with it. But just basic, governance stuff. The sort of thing that people who come from, as annoying as it is to see the same old faces running government, part of the reason that sometimes happens is you need people who know what they're doing. And when you take pride in hiring people that don't know what they're doing, this is kind of what you get. Somebody else would have checked beforehand. But, and it seems like a little silly. It's not like he murdered anybody, that's true. But, the law is the law. You're not supposed to spend more than $5,000 without notifying Congress, and you did. And you would, who would know? I don't know. Someone who was careful or would ask questions before just jumping out there and buying luxury items for themselves? Yeah, that would be the kind of person that would do it. All right. Let's see what else we've got here. Well, we can spend probably parts of the rest of the week going back on some of these other things. Let me close out with this one here, I think would make the most sense. Some reporting on the situation down in Florida, and in particular Mar-a-Lago and the Chinese-American community surrounding it. Mother Jones, David Korn, and Dan Friedman teaming up for this report in defamation lawsuit. A Trump donor acknowledges providing Chinese execs access in the U.S. Not really sure where she was going with this suit, but it's Cindy Yang back in the news. Last week, Cindy Yang, the Florida massage parlor entrepreneur and Trump donor, who has been part of the recent controversy involving Donald Trump's private resort, Mar-a-Lago, that's not the real name, filed a defamation lawsuit against the parent company of the Miami Herald. They're the ones that are breaking a lot of this news. So the suit focused on a Herald story that had placed Yang in the spotlight by reporting that she had posed for a photo with Trump at his West Palm Beach golf club during a Super Bowl party in February, and noting that Yang had founded the day spa where Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, had been busted for allegedly soliciting prostitution. Yang sold that particular spa years earlier. The suit claims the newspaper published false statements about Yang and her businesses that suggested illegal conduct had occurred in her spas. But the suit also contained a surprising passage that acknowledged that Yang had also run a business that provided Chinese executives access to American business and political culture, and this included entry to events at Mar-a-Lago. Interestingly, this is the key stuff here. After the Herald story appeared in March, Mother Jones reported that Yang owned a firm that had offered to sell Chinese clients access to Trump and his family via visits to Mar-a-Lago. The company, GY U.S. Investments, noted on its website, which has since been taken down, that its business consulting services addressed clients looking to make high-level connections in the United States. On a page displaying a photo of Mar-a-Lago, the firm said its activities for clients included offering them the opportunity to interact with the president, the American Minister of Commerce, and other political figures. I guess that would be Wilbur Ross, our Secretary of Commerce. The company boasted that it had arranged taking photos with the president and suggested it can provide clients with access to a White House and Capitol Hill dinner, whatever that's supposed to mean. Weeks after that story was posted, Yang's attorney, Evan Turk, contacted Mother Jones and threatened a lawsuit, claiming the article defamed Yang. In a letter, Turk wrote that Mother Jones's article inaccurately reported that Cindy Yang runs an investment business that is offered to sell Chinese clients access to Trump and his family. There is nothing but false conjecture based on her family's, this is nothing more than false conjecture based on her company's website that offered business assistance in America to potential Chinese clientele. A travel package is how he puts it. No lawsuit has yet been filed. So very interesting. That's they weren't trying to wriggle out of it by saying we're just selling tours, you see. Yet in the lawsuit Turk dropped on the Herald, he stated that Yang was in the access business. A paragraph citing her entrepreneurial talents explained how GY U.S. Investments was founded and operated. And, well, I guess they pretty much spill the beans on themselves here. It's a little bit longer than I'm going to be able to get through in the rest of the show, but it's well worth a look, and I'm glad that the Mother Jones team is still on top of it here. And good luck to the Herald in its lawsuit here. Anything else we want to grab away from this piece here? Let me see how we end down here at the bottom. The Mar-a-Lago scandal is certainly bigger than what happens with Yang. After a Chinese woman named Yujing Zhang sneaked into Mar-a-Lago last month, perhaps with the participation of Charles Li, a mysterious Chinese businessman, the Herald reported that federal investigators have been probing possible Chinese intelligence operations targeting Trump and Mar-a-Lago. The story triggered by Yang's photo with Trump now extends far beyond her day spa business. And that's really the point of all of that. Just wanted to bring you up to speed on what's going on there. What about bringing you up to speed on all the other things happening in the world, or even a different angle on the things we've already discussed? Well, you've got the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. What has he got on tap for you? Let's see. California U.S. Representative Katie Porter of the Financial Services Committee has no more Fs, you know that word, to give when Mnuchin testifies again on Tuesday. If they don't arrest him or open a trapdoor above an alligator pit, I'll be disappointed. On the rest of the menu, a new report on the horrific sex abuse at Ohio State doesn't exonerate Jim Jordan, but he learned from the president to say it does. There are disturbing connections between Trump, Putin, and Austrian neo-Nazis. Yes, good story there. And player empowerment taking women's sports to new heights.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Still more to come. When avoiding a clash with the EU, Swiss voters approved even tighter gun controls, and protesters promise that a snarling orange Trump baby blimp will mock Donnie Two Scoops outside the Parliament when he makes a state visit to Britain next month. Forgot that was happening. Would prefer to keep forgetting.